Indeed, and then research on thing called flow. Please, hi.
सर शुरू करना है क्या? हेलो. ओके ओके. Hello, good evening to everyone who is listening to this short talk on the introduction to biological diversity and its importance. First of all, I would like to share this beautiful picture that was captured somewhere in 1970s from the space, the picture of the Earth from space. This particular picture is the one who brought all the changes of our thought process and belief. This particular picture is also the one that has shown to us that the economic model that we had already been using before the Second World War, before the First World War, and the imperial economy that we can say was really given a blow. In this sense, this is the picture of the Earth which is flickering in the space, which is so dynamic and at the same time so finite. So this whole idea that the resources of the Earth is unlimited become a really very wrong idea. So this particular picture of the image of the Earth, which is also called as the blue marble in normal parlance, has given us this particular idea that protecting this particular Earth, protecting this beautiful sphere is something that is so closely associated with the sustainable development model, which is different from the economic model of the world before the Second World War. Importance and the significance of the Earth, the ecology and the ecosystems, the habit and habitats of the plants, animals, and also the relationship between the biotic and abiotic, meaning the living and the non-living, is so significant for our life today that it has become a very seriously challenging issue. And we know that in the civil services examination and post-examination, when you become successful as an aspirant of the civil services and started working by contributing in the society as a bureaucrat, we realize that understanding the environment plays a very pivotal role in shaping our economy, in understanding our culture, in understanding really important development models. And the civil services syllabus has really preempted this importance. If you happen to look at the syllabus of the preliminary and the mains, the portion of biological diversity, the portion of ecosystem ecology and environment is shown like this. If you happen to look at the preliminary syllabus, you will find general issues on environmental ecology, biodiversity, and the climate change. And if you happen to look in the main section, you will find conservation. Conservation here means the conservation of the biological diversity, conservation of the natural ecosystems, and also looking into protection and restoring the ecosystem that has been degraded, and also in understanding the kind of the relationship that needs to be maintained in the cities, in the towns, and every possible living places. And environmental pollutions and degradation is also the part of the mains syllabus, and you will also find in the syllabus environmental impact assessment. This is the portions of what we call as environmental impact management, which is a part of the environmental legislation. Environment may be protected, may be prevented before it is happening. So the syllabus for the civil services examination has the part of environment and ecology, and it is written in the preliminary and in the main section like this. But for the preparation of this particular subject and the syllabus, a portion of the environmental ecology, I would like to advise to you that one must read the preliminary and mains together, because Many of the issues that is mentioned in the preliminary cannot be understood. It should be studied like a story. Rather, it should be studied like a textbook. Rather, it should be experienced like when you get up and when you have your breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and a whole lot of activities that you do in your daily happens in a very chronological and a very systematic manner. Same is the case here. The preliminary and main syllabus should be understood in a very chronological, in a very story-like manner. And that's what we are going to do together in the days to come. So today I would like to introduce this particular portion of the syllabus, that is biological diversity and conservation. Here we will try to understand what is biodiversity, why it is important, and what are the ways to conserve the biological diversity, and what will be the significance of doing all these particular business and exercises. First of all, when we talk about biological diversity includes different forms of life that you see on land. For example, you have humans on land. For example, you have elephants on land. You have lots of beautiful flowers and lots of mushrooms. And there might be so many animals and plants which live in the watery ecosystem or the aquatic environment. Talk about biological diversity, that is the plants and animals and also the places where they are found that surrounds every one of us is an example of biological diversity. So when I ask to any one of you, you will surely say that I have had butter, I have had, for example, rice, idli, dosa, or you talk about any kind of traditional food items or any kind of very contemporary junk foods that some of you might have tasted and had eaten before some time now. They all are part of the biological diversity because you ask to any forms of edible things that you have seen, you have eaten, and you have experienced, they will always tell us the beautiful story about from where they come from and how did they get processed and it come to our dining room. So biological diversity is everything that surrounds us, and it has a relationship or many relationships among each other and also along with the non-living components that surround us. So biological diversity is captured by these beautiful pictures that lives on land, that lives on the animals and plants and mushrooms and bacteria and virus. They live on land, they live in water, they live on the air, mountains. You name it, they are going to be found there. They all are constituting what we call as biological diversity or biodiversity. I must not forget to tell you a beautiful story about how this particular term was originated. The term biological diversity is the correct term, and this particular term is contracted into what we call as biodiversity. Even in your syllabus, the term biodiversity is mentioned, not the biological diversity, but you must not get confused. Biological diversity, the diversities of life forms, different kinds, they are called as biological diversity, and it is contracted into biodiversity by none other than a very famous biodiversity conservationist called as Edward Osborne Wilson. Edward O. Wilson was the first person in the world who popularized this particular term called as biodiversity, and that is the reason why he is called as the father of biodiversity. But the term biodiversity came in 1980s, the middle part of 1980s, but the term biodiversity that came in 1987, 88 became so important and so popular and so meaningfully used by every one of us. When we talk about the biological diversity, if you happen to look at this particular picture on the right side is a lots of insects that you have collected from any of the forested region. So this particular insects, when we talk about the insects, an insect is a particular group of animals. Suppose, for example, if I'm using the red color, I'm so sorry. You may not be able to, so let me do it here. So an insect is defined by the characters like it has got head, it has got thorax, it has got abdomen. And say for example, butterfly is an insect because they have head, they have this thorax, they have abdomens, and they have two pairs of wings, And very interestingly, all the wings are coming out of the thorax. And from this thorax, three legs will be on the left side and three legs will be on the right side. What I want to tell you is not the anatomy and morphology and classification of insects, but just to give you a glimpse that the picture that you are seeing in front of your screen, they all belong to insects. Do you know the reason why? Because it has got head, it has got thorax, it will have two pairs of wings, and it has got six legs. Okay, three on the left side and three on the right side. Every possible, you count the whole of the insects in this particular pictures, they all are belonging to the same class called insecta because they have the three characters that I have said to you, but they all are looking different here. So they all belong to insects, no doubt, but they are represented by different species. So when I talk about the biological diversity, first of all, it talks about the species diversity. Species. What is a species? The species are the individuals which are inter breathing, meaning A and B may be looking different. For example, human male and human females, they are not very similar anatomically, but if they are mating, they produce baby. Same is the case when I talk about a species is a group of individuals which are interbreeding. But if we happen to look at this particular picture, on the right side, these are all represented by different species. These are all differently looking individuals, and they are not similar to each other. But if you happen to look at the left side, this particular crickets or this grasshoppers can mate with this one because they belong to the same species and they are interbreeding. The sizes might be different. The males are smaller than the females, but when they come together and mate, they produce the baby. So on the left side, I'm talking about certain species, and on the right side, I'm talking about lots of species. So when I talk about the species, a crocodile is different from snake, a snake is different from earthworm, an earthworm is different from insects, an insect is different from peacock, a peacock is not a cassowary is not a parrot. All these different groups are what we call as a species. So please remember, when we talk about the biological diversity is constituted by different species that surround us. Early in the morning when you get out of your bed room and come to the balcony, you will be listening the sound of the cuckoo, one species. You can also see and you can also see and hear the very, very loud voice of the peacock, and you will also be finding the dance of the peahen. You have two species, right? If you have flies, honeybees, these are all species. So in the world today, it is believed that we are represented by near about 2 million species. Out of these 2 million species, human beings represent only one species. We are only one. Our population will be 9 billion, but all the humans in different parts of the world are represented by only one single species, that is called as Homo sapiens, or also called as Homo sapiens sapiens. So please remember, we have around 2 million species that scientists have discovered till now. And very, very interestingly, every now and then we keep on discovering newer and newer species. But the sad thing is, before we discover some of the very important locations of the world, that location is getting burned because of conflict, because of economic development, because of agricultural activities, because of damming the rivers, because of the climate change, and so on and so forth. The second, so if you happen to look at this particular pictures that is taken from the NCERT 12 standard, so all the animals of the world, if you happen to look at, they are mainly classified into invertebrates, which does not have a vertebral column, and vertebrate. For example, humans are like this, right? So it is a head, then atlas. So we have this vertebral column, right? So like this, if a particular animal is having the vertical column on the ventral on the dorsal side of this particular animals, and in many of these particular animals. We call them as vertebrates. For example, fish is representing the largest number of species in terms of all the vertebrates of the world. Then you have the mammals where human belongs to. Then you have the bird. If you happen to look at this picture, fish are representing the largest number in terms of all the vertebrates. And then comes the birds are also very, very diverse. Then reptiles, then you comes the amphibians and mammals. These are vertebrates. And if you happen to talk about the invertebrates, like jellyfish we talk about, like crustaceans, mollusks, so many other caterpillars, insects, if you happen to look at the invertebrates, the major portion of the invertebrate diversity is represented by the insect. And then if you happen to look at the plant, the flowering plants are represented in terms of the number of species, the highest, okay, in the hierarchy, in terms of the number, in terms of numerical superiority. And if you happen to look at, there are lichens, there are mosses, there are fungi, there are algae. This belongs to another group of categories. But when we talk about the biological diversity, we talk about this many different species. So when we talk about different species, a person from Kerala can easily identify the taste and size of different kinds of banana that is used for making the banana chips. For example, there might be very small banana. If you happen to look at this particular picture, this portion, they're very small, but their taste and smell and flavor might be so different from others. So indeed, biological diversity is so beautiful and meaningful, and it provides so much of the smell, so much of the beauty, and so much of the food to us. So biological diversity talks about species. In general parlance, I will say that, oh, these are all bananas. But if I observe very keenly, we will find that these bananas are represented by different species. It is not like that they are celebrating a holy celebration by coloring them with different colors. Absolutely not. These different colors, this different size, this different smell that they do have is all because of the different species that banana has. And when we look at many of these particular, for example, capsicum is a different species as compared to tomato, as compared to, for example, the chili that we use it. Then you have pulses, you have rice, the grains. These are all different species of vegetables, different species of herbs that we use as food and medicines, spice and condiments. If you happen to look in the history, the Irish potato famine in Ireland was one of the deadliest disasters in human life, in the human history. 76% of the people in Ireland, they have to displace themselves from their country and find survival in different regions of the world, including America. And whole of this particular process began because people in Ireland started cultivating a certain type of potato which is good looking, juicy, very nice to eat and very large in size. But every one of them were infected by Phytophthora infestans, a fungal infection. Just see this picture. A potato, when you cut it, there's nothing left to be eaten. Everything has been all parasitized by the fungus. So this particular problem, very interestingly, my dear students, was saved by none other than the introduction of different species or different varieties of potato from the original Homo potatoes. That is none other than the foothills of the Andes Mountains. From there, different varieties of potatoes was introduced in Ireland, and the famine in Ireland was saved. How? When people were cultivating one type of potato, that means only one species of potato, it was very easy when you do this kind of monoculture to be attacked by a particular specific fungus. But when we brought different types of different biodiversities of the potatoes from different regions of the world, here in this particular case from the original home of the potatoes, that is the foothills of the Andes Mountain in South America, when different potatoes were introduced and much of this fungal infection could not happen to those particular varieties of potato. Maybe this particular potatoes produce certain kind of chemicals which acts as a deterrent to the growth and infection of the fungus. So very interestingly, can I also say to every one of you that if there is a varieties of potato, then, or the richer varieties of potato, the field will be more richer. We will be more protecting against the invading infectious agents. So that is the reason why we talk about mixed cropping, we talk about crop rotation, we talk about, for example, joint forest management. We talk about planting different kinds of vegetables in the plots of land instead of cultivating at one go and cultivating a particular type of vegetables. So biological diversity increases the richness of your agricultural field, the strength of your agricultural field, and more protection against the invading pests and fungus. So biological diversity also includes, besides different genes you have in this particular pictures, I show you here a beautiful flower, and this particular flower is being used by none other than two different types of insects. This particular insect is a blister beetle. It is also coming here to suck the nectars and eat the parts of the flower. And here is a honeybee which is coming to pollinate and also to suck the nectars. So please remember, when I talk about the biological diversity, we talk about the species that we have already discussed. We also talk about different species. For example, many of the individuals are not looking alike because we have different chromosomes, they have different genes, right? So in the case of biological diversity, we have seen there is one level called as a species level of biological diversity. The second was genetic level of biological diversity, or the genetic diversity. The third one is, if you look at these three pictures, this particular flower is hosting two different kinds of animals in the form of blister beetle and honeybee. And if you happen to look at these particular pictures, that most probably I had taken when I visited none other than the Bharatpur Wildlife Sanctuary, which is also now called as Keoladio National Park in Bharatpur in Rajasthan. If you happen to visit this wetland, you will find nilgai, you will find several kinds of migratory birds like ducks, then you have some mammals and fishes, and you have trees. So if you happen to look at this particular picture, what this particular picture is showing is this is a home of different animals. Just like this flower is the home of two insects now, and this particular wetland is hosting different kinds of animals and plants. If you happen to look at the Amazon River in South America, this tropical rainforest, every inch of this rainforest, if you explore, you are going to get lots and lots of diverse forms of plants and animals. So what I want to say is biological diversity consists of species diversity. Biological diversity consists of genetic or the genetic level of biological diversity, and the third one is the homes, or also what we call as habitats, are also important category of biological diversity. So we have learned three categories of biodiversity. The first one is species, the second one is genetic, and the third one is the habitat or the ecosystem diversity or the landscape diversity. So biological diversity consists of these three categories. So if we happen to look at this, biological diversity includes river also, forest also. It has got water, it has got land, it has cloud, it has flowers. So biological diversity, the third level, when we talk about the ecosystem, we now appreciate the importance of the climate, the importance of the cloud and rain, the importance of water in the rivers, the importance of the slope of the hill for certain plants to grow there and there only. So these are the three levels or the three categories of biological diversity. Some of you might be asking, how old is our biological diversity? Please remember, biological diversity is as old as the first form of life that we have seen here. The Big Bang theory is the widely accepted theory that explains the origin of the Earth. So when the Earth was formed, the living organism was unable to be hosted here because of the kind of inhuman and inhabitable conditions that the Earth was having. 8 billion years ago, 1.5 billion after the Earth was formed, There was a lot of chemical reaction taking place in the water body. There is a lot of changes in the formations of the land and the landscapes. And at last, after 1.5, that is near about 3.8 to 3.5 billion years ago, the first form of living organism came on earth or in the river. Then different forms of life that you have seen, for example, 2 million species that we are seeing today is evolved gradually from our ancestral forms of life. So there are two things. One is origin of life. The second one is the formation of life. Then you have evolution of life. So this is the formation of the earth explained by the physicists, geologists, and then you have the earth. Then you have the origin of life. How did life came on earth? Once the life got originated, it started adapting to different places, and that resulted into so many of these particular forms of life that we see today, that we see as a biological diversity today. If we happen to look at this particular pictures of the world, we happen to see that there are certain regions in the world, there are certain countries in the world which is so exorbitantly large in terms of the biological diversity, and they are called as mega biodiversity rich countries. So if you happen to look at different regions of the world, again, different habitats of the world, I'm not talking about the political boundary. We have what we call as biodiversity hotspots of the world. When we look at this particular picture, biodiversity rich regions of the world, it crossed the boundary of the nation also. We have near about 35 to 37 biodiversity hotspots, but we have 17 biodiversity rich countries or mega diversity rich countries. India is one of them. But when we talk about the biodiversity hotspots, these are the regions which have at least 1500 species of plant which are not found anywhere else in the world. So if you happen to look at this particular pictures, the shaded regions of the world, so the Western Ghat, for example, then you have the Indo-Burma here in this particular region. So these are the regions of the world which have at least 1500 different species of plant not found anywhere else in the world. They are going to be found here in here only. So these are very, very rich. So the 1500 species of plant found in the Western Ghat is not going to be found in Mesoamerican region, is not going to be found in the Cape Floristic region of South Africa, right? So these are very rich in biological diversity. You might be asking the question, why we are using plants as a proxy for species richness, for defining the hotspots. It is because plants are immovable, they're easy to count, and also they are very good indicators of a particular ecosystem. And at the same time, plants also accommodate lots of different diverse forms of insects and animals. So if you have that many species of plants, imagine how many insects, how many mammals, how many of the other groups of animals may be depending on this specific endemic species. So biodiversity hotspots are very rich in endemicity, or they have high endemicity, right? The second one is this particular biodiversity hotspots that you're seeing in this particular picture is now having only 30% of the original vegetation that it used to have. That indicates that this particular region has been impacted upon by the changes, or this particular ecosystem has already lost 70% of the biological diversity that it used to have. At last, we can also say that biodiversity hotspots in the world are also the region which are by poor inhabited by poor people. So why do we say that the poverty of the people should be considered here? As the people in many regions of this biodiversity hotspots regions are poor and population is increasing, so what they easily do is deforestation, overfishing, and making them even more vulnerable. So when they are supposed to be protecting the biodiversity and get a livelihood, they are destroying their means of livelihood itself. So it gives us this message that these are the regions which are rich in biological diversity. These are the regions where destruction is happening so quickly, and these are also the reasons where the poor people are there. So our investment towards this particular reasons, protecting the people, okay, preventing the people from deforestations by making them, okay, richer, by diversifying their economic activities, we will be protecting the high endemic reasons of these particular places. We will also be preventing the destruction, and we will also be bringing the the sustainable development to those particular groups of people that inhabit these particular regions. You may be arguing that there are certain regions in this map where the people are rich enough, but still you are considering it as a biodiversity hotspot, so simply because of the high endemicity and the rate of destruction that is taking place. So in 1980s and 90s, when this particular concept came, uh, the, the third category, inhabited by poor, was very much flagged, but nowadays in many of the textbooks we tend to confine towards this two of the important reasons, that is high endemicity and high rate of destruction happening here. By and by, please remember, biodiversity hotspots are those ecological regions of the world which which may have 2, 3, 4 countries, regions in that particular regions. That means it can transcend the political boundaries. And these regions are highly rich in endemicity and the high rate of destructions, inhabited mainly by the poor people. India has got 4 important biodiversity hotspots. The first one is Western Ghat and the Sri Lankan biodiversity hotspot. This is the first one. The second one, we have the Himalayan biodiversity hotspots. We have what we call as Indo-Burma biodiversity hotspots. This is the third one. And the fourth one is Sundalan, the Sundalan biodiversity. Here, very interestingly, the Car Nicobar group of islands of India is a part of the biological diversity hotspot called as Sundalan. So we have 4 biodiversity hotspots of the world in our country, or our country is a part of it. When we talk about the biological diversities are also governed by certain important theoretical ideas about the diversity. For example, latitudinal gradients means when we go to equator, and then when we go to the higher latitudes like North Pole or the South Pole, biological diversity is more in the tropical regions. This is a very interesting idea. We will be discussing in detail in some platform, but for the time being, please remember that latitudinal gradients that we are seeing in the patterning of biological diversity distributions might be because this particular region has an ambient temperature and rainfall conditions, climatic conditions, and these particular regions might not have been affected by the devastating geological phenomena in recent time. And another very interesting thing is, suppose this is India and you have Sri Lanka, you have Andaman and Nicobar Island, for example. So, or Lakshadweep you have, or we can say that this is any of the country, this is a continental mass, and there are 2 islands of the same size. One is near the continental one, this is all ocean, one is here, one is situated further away, and the same, and for example, that island which is located similarly from this particular continent mass, the same, suppose there's a small island here. What we have found out is, if a particular island is near this continental mass, it will have more biological diversity. And if a particular island is small and another island is bigger, the bigger island will have more biological diversity. This is what we call as the island biogeography theory of 1962, which has a very similar explanation in what we call as species area relationship. So it means if an ecosystem is large, if an environment is large, it will have more species diversity. At certain point of time, inflection may happen. At certain point of time, an asymptote will come, the same line. Whenever you increase, it will have the same kind of a label, no doubt. But please remember, as and when the area increases, there are major chances that the species diversity will also increase. That is the reason why in some of the years of the civil services preliminary examination, a question was asked, do you like a smaller, fragmented national park, or you like a bigger intake park? We will always go for a bigger intake park because the species area relationship has clarified. The island biogeography have substantiated that a larger intake habitat has more species diversity than the one which is fragmented. So this is one explanation. If the island is far away, it have less diversity, and if the island is nearer, it will have a more diverse. And here, sorry, one very interesting thing is if a particular island is away from a continental mass here, there might be a very peculiar condition here, though the species diversity might be more here, but certain endemic species not found anywhere else in the world, you may find it here. For example, in Pacific archipelago or the smaller islands in the middle of the ocean has certain species which you will not find anywhere else in the world, because that particular habitat, that particular species have been adapting to each other for a long time without being introduced by some other new species from somewhere else, or without having any chance of migrating from this particular region. So these are some of the ideas of biological diversity, how all is a biological diversity, and what is the distribution patterns of the biological diversity. Now I would like to discuss with you the importance of biological diversity. The importance of biological diversity is many, so many. I can give you the list of biological diversity's importance, and the list will be something like an unending, or the exercise will be an unending process. That is the reason why I would like to use this particular concept given by none other than, it was Kofi Annan. He established what is called as Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. It was started in 2001. The report came in 2003 and 2004. This particular Millennium Ecosystem Assessment for the first time has given for us the importance of the biological diversity by coining a very interesting term called as ecosystem services. If I discuss ecosystem services with you, I hope much of the importance of biological diversities will be covered. So ecosystem services is defined by Millennium Ecosystem Assessment as the benefits that we derive from the ecosystem process, ecological processes, products, or the process, whatever it is. So as far as the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment is concerned, the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment has given four important processes or four important services of the ecosystem. So let's see what is this ecosystem services, the benefits that we derive from ecosystem, and how they are categorized. Excuse me, I'll just have water. I'm so sorry. Yes, human beings needs biodiversity, the process, right? So as far as the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment is concerned, the first services can be categorized as provisioning services. The provisioning services of the ecosystem can include food production, water that you are using in the water reservoir, or the water that is useful, that is reserved for hydroelectric power project, how much. For example, I may include medicine. I hope 76% of the medicine that we are using today all over the world is directly coming from plant. Remaining 24% are some of the chemicals that you derive from plants after processing or the animals, or other chemicals which is synthetic, but 76% of the medicine that we use in the hospitals all over the world is directly coming from plants. But when we talk about Ayurveda, it is 100%. And I was always telling to my students that in a highly cultured society and having lots of legends and myths and epics, somebody rightly said that mm, the importance of biodiversity in the importance of biodiversity as a source of medicines, we can we can beautifully relate with the use of Sanjeevani that saved the life of Lakshmana. So, for example, in India, for example, our relationship with the plant as a source of medicine is as old as our culture. So, provisioning services is in the form of products. Then we have cultural services. The cultural services are intangible, that cannot be touched. These are spiritual, these are aesthetic. Why do you want to go to the big, what to say, mountains like Himalaya? Then why do you want to go to hill stations? Why do you want to go to the snow-clad mountains and sea? Because it is beauty. And the sense of belongingness is very closely associated with the aesthetic or the beauty. For example, when we listen this particular song, Sare Jahan Se Acha Hindustan Hamara, and if you happen to listen that particular lyrics or read the lyrics of the story of the song, how beautifully Muhammad Iqbal has drawn the beauty, especially the biological diversity of the country, and it moved the heart of the people. It inspired the people. It motivated the woman to come out of the kitchen, to come out of the, I'm so sorry to use this word, I'm talking about that historical point of time when women were not given enough of the opportunity to even take part in the national movement. And this is the song that moved. But if you look at this and if you listen to this particular song, it's not the beauty of the country that is being explained and giving you this particular motivation that look, we have thousands of rivers and they are fed by the melting of the ice, and it's much more beautiful, cleaner than the river Thames of England. Then you talk about the Himalaya, it is much bigger and larger, much larger than the Alps mountain, which is very small as compared to the Mount Everest. So we have everything here, and why should not we protect? Why should be we feeling inferior to others? So aesthetic, the spiritual, the sense of belongingness, the nationalism, this is very much derived from our surrounding environmental conditions. Then we talk about the education. The cultivation of the plant that we call agriculture is not something that we learn from our environment. Recreational, we want to go to the riverbank and have a nice picnic. That is, and when you go to that river, you want to see the wild animals and fishes and wild plants and flowers. So cultural services includes like linguistic diversity. Our language is very much derived from our surrounding environment. For example, if you happen to go to the tropical regions of the world, I will guarantee you that it will have more languages, or the linguistic diversity will be more here than anywhere else. That linguistic diversity is very much overlapping with the diversity of plants and animals, habitats of a particular place. Then we talk about the regulating services. This is the first services, second one, the third and fourth. So the third one is regulating services like climate regulation. We now know that if the mangrove forests of Andaman and Nicobar were not present, the impact of the tsunami that took place in 2004 might have been much more dangerous than what it used to be in 2004 December. So plants, forests, mountains, riverbanks, mangrove forests, they are protecting the climate extremes. Why do we think about planting lots of trees? It says that it will sequester the atmospheric carbon dioxide. That is a vivid example how the rich varieties of plants in a particular forest, undisturbed forest, is acting as a sink, is sequestering the carbon dioxide to the atmosphere and is going to reduce this climate extremes. Flood regulation. For example, this is a hill well visitated and this is a hill no visitation left. If there is a heavy amount of rainfall taking place, lot of erosion, lot of bad things happen and less of erosion, rather it will help in growing these particular trees even more luxuriantly and the herbivores population will increase, predators population will be balanced. But here it will bring a lot of changes. It may result in a desertification also. Water purification, for example. So many of the plants, aquatic vegetation, they help in the purification of water. So regulating services also includes, for example, pest control. How come you control the population of the pest without using synthetic chemicals like DDT? It is because if there are birds in a particular area, the birds will be eating the insects. Just for example, I was looking at the BBC Earth. There was a very interesting program last night, and very interestingly, uh, what I could see is a couple, a, uh, a hornbill, okay, male and female. They make a hole. In the hole, they make a nest. And when these particular chicks are growing up, every minute they require one insect to be fed. So there might be so many of the insects which will be causing a lot of damage to our agricultural crops. If we have trees, if we have the nests of the hornbills protected, they will act as a very important regulating agency to regulate the population of the insects. They might be feeding on our cash crops. There are a lot of historical documents that explains how in some dynasties in China they prevented all the parrots from feeding the agricultural field and they all killed the birds, and the next year there was a famine. There was no good agricultural harvesting. So there are many of these particular examples how the tigers are protecting a particular grassland by preventing the overexploitation of the deer populations. So these are some of the natural controlling agents that nature provides us in the form of different species, in the form of prey, in the form of predator, in the form of many of the functionalities that regulate the ecosystem. So this is regulating services, and we have the last one called as supporting services, which includes biogeochemical cycling, how the nutrients are cycled. For example, there might be a salmon fish that come from Europe that come to Alaska. And this particular fish is feeding on many of the nutrients, food items that is found in the river system of England, river system of Europe. They're coming, crossing the Atlantic Ocean, carrying lot of food items, eating, and they come to North America for breathing. So when they die after breathing, the nitrogen that you have collected from the ocean and the European countries is again feeding the nutrient requirements of the plants. So I can say that nitrogen in the leaves of a particular tree, in the particular tree in America, in the colder region of Alaska, might be the nitrogen that was collected by a particular fish from Europe. And when these particular young fishes go away, they will be contributing. So what I want to tell you is There is a biogeochemical cycle. For example, there is a transpiration taking place, there is an evaporation taking place, cloud is being formed, then it is falling in the form of rainfall, plants are again releasing. So all these particular cycles are allowing the movement of the nutrients in the earth by exchanging from geosphere to hydrosphere to lithosphere to biosphere. That means living organism, non-living components, then living organism, non-living components. So there is a cyclic process, which is also an example of ecosystem services. Then we talk about the soil formations. Then we talk about primary production, that is photosynthesis. Then provisioning of the habitat. For example, when the ocean is there, when the rivers are there, they provide us. In many of the textbook, you will find this habitat provisioning as an example of provisioning services. That is also correct. So I would also wish to place this habitat provisioning as an example of the provisioning services, not the supporting services. So if we happen to look at the biological diversity, their importances, I just want to tell a beautiful story that is told by the cocoa plant, the cocoa seeds that is used for making the chocolate. Everyone wants chocolate, right? And we always are crazy towards chocolate. But please remember, this cocoa plant, the pot of which contains this coffee-like bean or the cocoa seeds, this cocoa seed will be roasted and ground, and it's going to make the chocolate that we eat. But please remember again, this particular seed that is useful for the growth of cocoa plant next season, this cocoa seed that is used for the chocolate, this cocoa seed which is moving the economy of many of the countries like Madagascar, this all are possible because these particular mosquitoes are pollinating the flower of cocoa. If these mosquitoes are not visiting the different flowers of cocoa and is bringing the pollen grain of one flower to the stigma, that is the female part of the flower, to the next visiting flower, next basis of the mosquito, the pollination will not take place, then fertilization will not take place, then the seeds will not be formed, cocoa will be extinct. So what I want to tell is whatever sentient creature we call this is ugly, this is beautiful, this is good smell, this is bad, these all adjectives are something that is constructed by human, okay, taking care of our senses. But there are so many things which is beyond our senses, but so beautiful. And they are played by the ugly looking insects that we call ugly. But from today onwards, let's try to celebrate every form of life and their significances in an ecosystem. Biological diversity today is getting threatened, and there are many reasons of getting threatened. Excuse me. Lakshmi, can I have a glass of water, please? You put it there. Bottle is there. Excuse me. Thank you. The hot and humidity of Delhi and the excitement that I have meeting all of you here has really dried my throat. I'm so sorry. But the passion to be with you and my intense desire to share everything that I know so that you can very, very beautifully and comfortably give this examination uh, is so much here. So now this particular adjective like beauty, ugly, this is just because of some of the senses that we have, but there are so many things beyond our senses, but they are so important for the system that we are in. So biological diversity, what you have known now is, if I don't forget, definition of biological diversity, that is biodiversity, the sum total of all the species, genes and habitats. Biodiversity is as old as life on earth. Biodiversity is distributed in different places of the world. There are some places called, say, biodiversity hotspot. We also know that biodiversity richness is less in the polar region and more in the tropical region. We also know that a large habitat will have more biological diversity than the smaller one. We also know the importance of biological diversity now. Let me bring you to the threats to biodiversity. Today, the number one cause of the loss of biological diversity is what we call as habitat loss. How is habitat loss being happening? It is because of deforestation, it is because of agriculture, it is because of developmental activities, it is because of urbanization, it is because of the exploitative form of economic activities that we have. Habitat loss is the number one cause of the loss of biological diversity. The second one is over extraction, like poaching of the animals. Here in the picture, you are seeing the huge number of the elephant ducks, and just see the pathetic condition of the elephants when the poachers are killing them and uprooting and rooting out this particular teeth from this particular beautiful animals. This is a glimpse of the tip of the iceberg. There are so many tigers we are over extracting, meaning we are killing them more than their reproductive capacity to rebound back. Why we are killing tiger? Because of the skin. Why we are killing certain animals? Because of the so-called medicinal importance of certain organs of the animal. We are over extracting or over harvesting the medicinal plants. So again, I tell my students that it is good that Sanjeevani is only in the epic and in the textbook. If the Sanjeevani is discovered today, I guarantee again to you that it will be completed by tomorrow. It will not be lasting for 24 hours too. So many of the powers will come and it will uproot the whole or ransack the habitats. And tomorrow, every pharma company will claim that we have Sanjeevani in our medicinal products. That's the range of the scale of destruction that we are having. Then we also know over extractions, for example, overfishing. This is a beautiful fish, one of the favorite food items of shark. This is a bluefin tuna, and this particular fish is the costliest fish in the world. It is it is caught from the coast of America, and it is mainly sold in the Tokyo market. Means invasive alien species, for example, eucalyptus, for example, this is Lentina camara, and here this is one particular plant which is destroying our wetlands, and this is none other than what we call as water hyacinth. These have been introduced to our country. This has been introduced to many places of the world from their natural home for their beauty, for their afforestation program, intentionally or non-intentionally. But these particular groups of plants are not invasive in their natural home. For example, eucalyptus is not an invasive species in Australia because they are controlled by the herbivore population there. But in our country, none of the cows and buffaloes will be comfortable eating the leaves of the eucalyptus tree. So this is one of the very important threats to the biological diversity. So we have this invasive alien species. This is a particular fish called as the Nile perch. This was introduced by the Britishers from Nile River in Egypt to the Lake Victoria in Tanzania, and this many of the species of the cichlid fish have been already gone into extinction in this particular lake because of the introduction of the Nile perch. So that's a very, very dangerous situation. And now I'm giving you the status of the biological diversity that is given by IUCN, which have a particular book published very regularly called as Red Data Book. According to the Red Data Book, the status of the biological diversity can be extinct, that when it's no longer found living in their natural home, in the laboratory, or in the zoo. They are found only and only in the photographs and fossils, like dinosaur. We have another one called extinct in the wild. That means they are no longer present in their natural habitats, but they might be found in our laboratory, in our zoological garden, in our botanical garden, or tissue culture laboratories. Then there are threatened species. These are called as the threatened species. The first one is critically endangered, and vulnerable. These are categorized according to the seriousness of this particular species, according to the conditions of vulnerability of extinction that they have. Then we have near threatened. When you have least concern, we have data deficient, we have not evaluated. This can be some of the species which have been recently discovered and you have not evaluated. Data deficiency means you know the species is present, but you are unable to find them and you are unable to do the survey, you are unable to collect the data because of political reasons, because of the disturbances that is happening in that area, maybe because of the border issue, maybe because of internal displacement, refugees. So many issues might happen there, political issues that have resulted into banning the people to go there and do the survey. Least concern. These are the species whose population is quite high. There is no serious threat to them. Near threatens are the population is good, but the habitat is getting threatened, so we need to protect them. Vulnerable. These are threatened. Okay, for example, 50% of the species have population has gone in the last 10 years. Endangered. These are some of the species endangered and vulnerable species. So how to govern the biological diversity? As far as the governance of the biological diversity is concerned, we have the Convention on Biological Diversity. This was established in 1992 in the Rio de Janeiro, and the objective is conservation of biological diversity, the sustainable use of the biological diversity. This is the second objective. The third objective is fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising out of the utilization of genetic resources to the CBD. So Convention on Biological Diversity, also we call as United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. It has got COP, Conference of Parties. Conference of Parties is also called as the governing body of the CBD. And this Conference of Parties is held after the break of 1 year. It is a biennial biennial conference. But in the first 3 conferences, it was happening regularly each year. But after the third, that is from the 4th Conference of Parties to the UN CBD, it has been happening after the break of 1 year. But in recent time, because of COVID, we did not have in 2000, and we have in 2001 in Kunming in China, the first part. The second part was in Montreal in 2022. That was the latest convention on Conference of Parties to the CBD. So CBD has got 3 objectives, and some of the issues are about genetic resources confused with the Conference of Parties to the United Nations Convention Framework on Climate Change. United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Then we have another COP for United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. These 3 are called as the sister convention of the 1992 Rio de Janeiro. Here we are talking about the UNCBD, United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. So these are the one. The latest one, Conference of Parties 15, was in Kunming, China. This is so important because global framework on biological diversity was framed, and we have a lot of, there's a story behind that will be, there will be another platform I will be able to discuss incomplete and succinctly about how this global biodiversity uh, framework come into pictures. How is it different from, for example, IG target? What is Nagoya protocol, so and so forth. For today, let me just revise you very quickly about the conference of parties from the latest to the earliest. So conference of parties 15 was held in 2001 and 2022. Conference of Parties 14 was held in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. Then Conference of Parties 13 was held in Cancun in Mexico, which is so important because it is in this particular convention meeting that we had what is called as well-being. How is biological diversity going to help in establishing well-being for every one of us? Then we have Conference of Parties 12 that was held in Korea in 2014. This is also a very uh, important conference of parties that talk about the mainstreaming of biological diversity in the Sustainable Development Goals. Conference of Parties 11 was held in Hyderabad in India in 2012. 2010 is so important. It is in this particular convention that we have Nagoya Protocol for the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits of genetic resources come into being. And then we also talk about the IG target, the 20 targets to achieve the goals of biological diversity, or the CBD, was discussed and came into light. Then Conference of Parties 9 was in Germany. Conference of Parties 8 was in Curitiba, Brazil. Kuala Lumpur 2004. Conference of Parties 7, April 2002, Hague in Netherlands. Conference of Parties 6, 5 was in Nairobi in Kenya. Conference of Parties 4 was in Bratislava in Slovakia. Conference of Parties 3 was in Buenos Aires in Argentina. So if you happen to look at this particular chronology, 1996, then it is 1998. So after the break of every 1 year, it has been happening. But the first and the second, we have the first one that was 1994, and the second one is 1995. But from 1996 onward, that is Conference of Parties 3, we have been happening this particular Conference of Parties to the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity after the break of 1 year. So this Conference of Parties that was adopted in 1992, India is one of the signatory. Then it came into force in 1994, and the first Conference of Parties was held in 1994. So these are some of the latest story of the CBD. For example, the 15th meeting of the Conference of Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, it was held one part in Kunming, later on it was held in Montreal. So this meeting adopted Kunming Declaration, Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework is the latest one. So you have what is called as Global Biodiversity Framework. What are we going to do, and what should be the policy and programs? What are the things that we are lacking to achieve the 3 goals of the CBD? To achieve that, what should be the global biodiversity framework or the structure that we need to adopt is something that came into light in 2022. So the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework has got the background, what is the benefits, what are the aims and objectives, what is the relationship between the Sustainable Development Goal that the world has to achieve by 2030 with the CBD is with everyone. Sustaining a healthy planet and delivering benefits essential for all the people. This Vision 2050 can be achieved if we have this mission of 2030. By 2030, if the Sustainable Development Goals, which have mainstreamed the biological diversity, is achieved, then our goal of 2050 or vision of 2050 will be clear. So there are certain protocols like Cartagena Protocol and biosafety that talks about the genetic engineered products and the biological diversity. We have Nagoya Protocol on access and benefit sharing, which is also called as GBS, where the genetic resources which is there in the developing nations are allowed to be used by the developed nation. That is what we call excess. But when you are using the genetic resources of a poor nation like mine, the rich countries that manufacture drugs from the resources that I produce or I own, I must also get the same benefits. I must also get half the benefits that you are getting. The Nagoya Kuala Lumpur Supplementary Protocols on Liability and Redress to the Cartagena Protocol on Biodiversity is a part of the Cartagena Biosafety Protocols of 2000. In India, we have National Biodiversity Act that talks about the development of State Biodiversity Board. Then we talk about National Biodiversity Authority, which is the nodal agency. Then we also talk about biodiversity committees, which will be there in the district level. These are the 17 concrete goals of the Sustainable Development Goals, and believe me, each and every goal, if you pick it up, cannot be achieved without mainstreaming, without valuing, without appreciating, without regarding and taking care of biological diversity. At the end, I would like to share with you one of the very interesting statement that I found in Lewis Alice Adventure in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, written by Lewis Carroll, 1950. Come back, the caterpillar called her after. I have something important to say. You might say that the caterpillar is ugly looking, is useless. You might say that this mushroom has no importance, but please remember, these are the biological diversity that have evolved and have lived on this planet Earth much, okay, before human came on the Earth. They have adopted, they have seen, they have known what the world is constituted of and how to survive. So if we regard each and every species, remember, we will always have our path clear for future, for sustainability, and also for a synergistic, mutualistic relationship with our surrounding. With this, I would wish to conclude my small discussion on the introduction to biological diversity. How important are they? What are the causes of the loss of biological diversity? And why is it important as regard to our sustainable development, as regard to our future? How to conserve the biological diversity we will be discussing later on, but please remember, biological diversity conservation is by taking the guidance from the approaches of the conservation of biological diversity that is given by IUCN. We have what is called in situ, that is conserving biological diversity in the natural habitat. Another one is conserving biological diversity away from their natural habitats, which is called ex situ conservation. I wish that I have some more time to discuss the remaining in my next lecture. Thank you so much for your careful listening, and I would wish that you would be kind enough to share your feedback and give me and throw me questions so that I have time and I have uh, my interests again enlivened to reply to your queries. Thank you so much, and wishing that everyone enjoy reading environmental ecology, comfortably do all the questions by hitting on the appropriate answers of the question in the exam. Thank you so much. So that's all from my side. Thank you so much.